Hey there, Eaglets. This is Mr. Morsher, and today we'll be reading Women in Space by N.B. Grace. This is an AR level 5.3. Let's get started. The Pioneers. People have always wondered what it would be like to zoom up from the Earth and fly toward the stars. In the 1960s, that dream started to become a reality. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin, a cosmonaut from the Soviet Union, was the first person to fly into space. Shortly after that, two American astronauts each made one trip into space, but didn't enter orbit. In 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth, circling it 3 times. Longer space flights followed. In 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first person to walk on the moon. These space travel pioneers happened to be men, but women have played an important part of space exploration too. A giant Redstone rocket blasts off from Cape Canaveral in 1962. At its tip is Friendship 7, the small spacecraft that carried John Glenn on his historic first orbit around the Earth. When Valentina Tereshnikova was growing up in the Soviet Union, she loved adventure. While taking her college classes by mail, she took up parachuting. She made 126 jumps before she was 26. She also worked to fulfill her dream of flying in space. In 1961, she wrote to her government to ask if women could become cosmonauts. The answer was yes. After passing the same tests that male cosmonauts took, she joined the Soviet space team. Back in the USSR, Valentina grew up in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, also called the Soviet Union. In 1991, this huge country split up into one large nation and many smaller ones. Today, the large nation is called Russia. On June 16, 1963, the Soviets launched a rocket carrying Vostok 6, a space capsule with Valentina on board. She orbited the Earth for 70 hours. She was the first woman in space. After her flight, Valentina became famous in the Soviet Union and inspired thousands of girls. In 1969, she earned her college degree after years of taking classes by mail. Other female cosmonauts made space history as space exploration continued. In 1982, cosmonaut Svetlana Savitskaya became the first woman to make a spacewalk. When she returned safely from space, Valentina received many honors from her country. In 2003, on the 40th anniversary of her flight, Valentina was honored again. She's still a national hero. When America's space program first started, the United States and the Soviet Union were both trying to be the first country to send someone into space. In 1959, the U.S. tested 31 men to see whether they had the skills to become American astronauts. 7 men, the Mercury 7, were chosen to be astronauts in the new Mercury program. What most people didn't know, however, is that 19 women took the same exact tests. These tests lasted for weeks and were extremely hard. The men and women who wanted to become astronauts had every part of their bodies tested to see if they could survive in space. Mercury was the name of an ancient Greek god. He was the god of speed and brought messages from the gods to the humans. The Mercury 7 are shown here on this page, trying on their silver spacesuits. In the end, 13 women, the Mercury 13, passed all the tests. However, the American government wasn't really ready for the idea of sending women into space. Instead, the government ended the program. None of the Mercury 13 women got to become astronauts. The Mercury 13 women didn't have the chance to go into space, but they led the way for women to follow. American women would end up in space, although it took another 23 years. Record-setting pilot Jerry Cobb was one of the women who trained to become a Mercury astronaut. A pilot since her high school days, she flew just about every type of airplane. After being kept out of the astronaut program, Jerry used her flying skills to help others, especially people living in the Amazon River jungle. What sorts of women tried to be astronauts? All were pilots, but some were also scientists, teachers, or were in the military. U.S. women in space. By the time Sally Ride was 14, she was a star tennis player. In elementary school and junior high school, she also studied math and science. Even then, she was always interested in space. Sally studied astrophysics at Stanford University in California. One day, she saw an ad. NASA was looking for people who wanted to be astronauts. Sally applied for the job, but so did 8,000 other people. After going through testing and meeting with NASA officials, Sally got her wish. In 1978, NASA selected her to be an astronaut. Sally Ride poses for her first photo as a member of NASA's astronaut program in 1978. At NASA, Sally trained to be an astronaut and designed gear for the new space shuttle. She also worked in mission control during the 1982 flight of the Space Shuttle Columbia. She was the first woman in mission control to talk to astronauts during a flight. Then, in 1983, Sally made history. She flew into space as a mission specialist on the Challenger space shuttle. She became the first American woman in space. At age 32, she was also the youngest American astronaut to orbit the Earth. All adventures, especially into new territory, are scary, Sally said, but she was willing to take the risk. On the space shuttle, Sally helped to do experiments to learn more about space. The space shuttle was a new type of aircraft that first flew in 1981. The shuttle was the first space vehicle that could be used again and again. Sally Ride made her mark as the first American woman in space, but no woman had ever piloted a spacecraft until Eileen Collins. Even as a child growing up in Elmira, New York, Eileen loved airplanes. Her father took her to the local airport to watch airplanes. When Eileen was in college, she worked part-time to earn money for flying lessons. Her love of flight led her to the U.S. Air Force Academy. There, she became an outstanding pilot. Learning to fly. The U.S. Air Force Academy is in Colorado Springs, Colorado. It's like a regular college, except that all of the students are members of the United States Air Force. Many studied to become pilots. The metal ring at the top of Eileen Collins' spacesuit is used to attach a helmet that helps her breathe in space. Eileen became the first woman to pilot a space shuttle when she flew Discovery on a mission in 1995. She flew another shuttle mission in 1997. She was the pilot and NASA's first woman commander on 2 more missions in 1999 and 2005. Some people might look at the things I've done in my life, flying jets or flying the space shuttle, and say that I'm a risk taker, Eileen said. I think that really makes my life an adventure. Led by their commander, Eileen Collins, the crew of the Discovery prepares to take flight in 1995. Tragedy and triumph. Since space travel began, everyone involved with space flights has worked hard to make them as safe as possible. Even so, accidents happen. The U.S. space program has had several terrible accidents. One of the worst happened on July 28, 1986. Just seconds after the shuttle Challenger took off, it exploded. All 7 astronauts were killed. They included mission specialists Judith Resnick and Krista McAuliffe, the first teacher in space. The giant orange tank and the 2 smaller white tanks are filled with fuel. They drop off the shuttle after their fuel is used up during blastoff. The shuttle then enters orbit. To land, it glides back to Earth and lands much like an airplane. This was the second flight for Judith, who had flown on Discovery's first voyage in 1984. That earlier flight had several problems. Icicles formed on the outside of the shuttle. The ice could have damaged the ship. Judith used the shuttle's mechanical arm to chip all of the ice away, and the shuttle returned safely. Christa McAuliffe was excited about being the first teacher in space. She said, "Imagine me teaching from space, all over the world, touching so many people's lives. That's a teacher's dream." In 2003, 2 other women were among the 7 astronauts killed when the shuttle Columbia exploded. Christa McAuliffe was the first non-astronaut chosen for a space flight, and Judith used a mechanical arm like this one to clean ice off Discovery so that the shuttle could land safely. Since 1978, women have played more and more active roles in space exploration. They have been part of plenty of interesting firsts. For example, in 1984, Anna L. Fisher flew on the shuttle Discovery when her baby girl was only a year old. In 1992, Dr. Mae C. Jemison became the first African American woman in space. Medical doctor Mae Jemison helped the shuttle crew stay healthy in space. In 1996, Shannon Lucid lived on the Russian space station Mir for 7 months. She was the first woman to spend that much time in space. Here's Shannon floating on the Mir space station where there's no gravity. Since space flights began, almost 450 people have flown into space. Only about 1/10 of them have been women. That's mostly because some people have mistaken ideas about women when the space program began. Many people thought women weren't strong enough or smart enough for the job. The 40 women who have gone into space have proved them all wrong. Now, almost 1 out of every U.S. astronaut is a woman. For today's girls who want to explore space, the sky is no limit, and neither are people's ideas about what girls can do. Women astronauts from Great Britain, Japan, India, France, and Canada have all taken part in space missions. And is Eileen Collins speaking to a future astronaut? You never know. Glossary. Astrophysics. The study of objects and events in space. Capsule. The small passenger area of a spacecraft. Commander. The person in charge, usually of a ship, airplane, or spacecraft. Cosmonaut. An astronaut in the Soviet and Russian space programs. Gravity. The force that holds us to the Earth. In space, there is no gravity. Mission Control. The room back on Earth from which engineers help control space flights. Mission Specialist. An astronaut trained for a specific job on a space flight, such as running the space shuttle's mechanical arm. Orbit. To go completely around something, usually a planet such as Earth. Piloted. Drove or steered an aircraft or spacecraft. Spacewalk. Go outside the spacecraft while in space. Astronauts remain connected to the craft by special lines.